things are going to take time. So, as long as you stick with the business, there's going to be, ups and downs of the business, especially as a startup. I mean, we go through that now. You've got certain revenue numbers you have to hit, and, lots of work that has to be done. And of course, you've got, if you're a solution based, company, you've got, let's say you've got 20 customers, every customer wants something different. So you have to prioritize, but you just have to kind of stick with it.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat. We're always here to help. Now, today we got another great guest on the podcast, Harris Schwartz. And Harris is a quick introduction. So graduated from high school and did a little bit of junior college, became interested in TV production, and on his friend's advice, decided to drop out of college and go right into television production. Did that for about 5 years, and then started to get interested in computers and fell into security in the mid-90s. Worked for Earthlink for computer security as a tech support for a while. And then within a week of doing the job, the boss assigned him to do a special project, which is working on spam, which is a lot more prevalent today than it even was back then. And then that kind of directed his career from there. Stayed in security, both some physical and cyber security. And then from Earthlink, worked for a couple startups to do security programs. Around 2000, I got tired of the startup world. Went and worked with Wells Fargo for a period of time and did that for a few years, and then got into cyber threat intelligence for another company. Did some work with Disney, did some work with Safeway Albertsons, Levi Strauss, and a couple other companies, and then went to work on Ion Insurance for a period of time, and then in the last few months is jumped into his current business, which we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So with that much as an introduction, welcome on the podcast, Harris.
Well, thank you. It's very nice to be here.
So I just gave a quick run through to a much longer journey. So why don't we go back in time a bit to coming out of high school, going into a bit of college, and then your friend told you to drop out and go into TV production.
Yeah. I mean, thinking back in time, when I was growing up and stuff like that, my interest was all about TV production and films and stuff like that. I had a cousin, or I still have a cousin, that's he was actually one of the creators and producers of Monty Python, and he's still alive and he's still producing, and he was actually one of the probably one of my influencers of getting into that field. And so yes, I had moved to California from back east because I was born in Philadelphia. Started junior college, like a good boy. And shortly after that, had met through a cousin of mine, a producer, or actually he was a director. He was working on mostly commercials and, like McDonald's and Toyota and, stuff like that. And I got to talking to him, and I was like, hey, what's the best way to get into the field? Just like today, right? What's the best way to get into cyber? And he said, honestly, drop out of school and, come to work for me. And, you got to get that experience under your belt, and that's the best way. So that's what I did. Of course, my parents, not happy. Sorry.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, so you started out, which quote unquote, the traditional path. And I'm not saying it's for better or for worse, But, you get in there and you say, well, you should really just come work for me. And, was it just as simple as that? And you said, well, I don't really like college anyway, or it's not the best path, or he's laid out such a convincing argument. And, kind of how did that change a bit of trajectory? Because a lot of times people say, well, maybe I'll do it part-time, or I'll, juggle it, or, hey, I'd like to get a degree first as a fallback or anything of that nature. But what was it just a quick snap decision, or kind of what went into the decision making there?
It was kind of it was kind of all of that, like I did well in high school and whatnot. I enjoyed that time of my life and whatnot. Did I want to go to college? Yeah, part of me wanted to, part of me didn't want to, but this was more of, my parents, kind of pushing, you should go get, your, additional education and whatever. And so I was just kind of, moving through the motions. When I, met this director, I wasn't expecting him to say, yeah, drop everything, come work for me, because, that's not the usual, circumstance or scenario. Usually it's, you can go apply over here, or, maybe you can get an internship or something. I mean, he literally offered me a job, a paying job, and basically working under his wing. So yeah, I was like, yeah, let's do it. So yeah.
Hey, and I said, and sometimes it's those, hey, this is a good opportunity. It's too good to pass up. If I can get real world experience, get into the industry I want to be in, why go get the degree? Why not get that experience? And then, hey, if it doesn't work out, I can go back to school, or I can take a different path. So certainly makes sense. So now the one question I'll ask is, looking back, and hindsight is always 2020, and it's, always a bit of a different perspective. Would you have dropped out again, or would you have ever gone back and say, hey, I really should have finished school and waited?
That's actually an interesting question. I mean, it's the whole schooling piece has come up, maybe a few times, in my career and whatnot. And as I, tacking on more and more years and more experience, a lot of companies that I had applied to that had, let's say, a master's degree, as a requirement, the HR departments were like, oh, you got 20 years experience, that we can waive that. So I guess I'm, I'm thankful that companies were willing to waive those requirements, but, we could be in a different time, and companies, wouldn't do that. So it's been in the back of my head, over time and stuff, but I'm happy that, the way that things worked out.
Fair enough. Well, that's always a good answer to have. And if it works out well, then what more, not much more you can ask for. So now you say, okay, going to go work for the Friends, TV production, get into that. And I think you did that for about the period of 5 years. And then you decided to, start to get interest in computers and security and other things in the mid 90s. So what kind of made you decide to jump over there, leave the TV production realm, and kind of switch paths a bit?
Yeah, so it was a very interesting, you're basically, on the film side, you're starting at the bottom, just like any job, or any industry and whatnot. I enjoyed it for a good period of time. I met a lot of good people, met a lot of, other people, had fun. I just felt that there was probably something else that I could be doing. I was teetering on interest in law enforcement. I had taken tests with, the various agencies and stuff in LA, but, they had budget cuts and things of that nature. So that, that didn't work out. And then, of course, computers. I was using computers in the job, for the film TV stuff. So I was kind of seeing, how they were using computers and applications and things like that. So that was of interest. And then I had a neighbor in the building that I lived in, a small building. This was in Glendale, California, and I had a neighbor, and he had just gotten this job at Earthlink Network. And I was like, oh, what's that? And he's like, oh, they're this, internet service provider, and, they're growing quickly. And I think at the time they had 25 employees. I mean, they didn't have many employees at all. And he's like, yeah, they're hiring. They're trying to get tech support and customer support, and I can get you an interview. And I was like, okay, well, I'll apply, you know, and went and got in. Surprisingly, I was the 33rd employee at Earthlink.
Now, did you
So
have much experience, or was it just, hey, we'll take anybody that has interest, or kind of, because it seemed like certainly a different skill set or based on TV production over to different industry. So was it just more of, hey, we'll train you, you have interest, we'll do it, or this is entry level, or kind of how did you make that transition to kind of acquiring that new skill set?
yeah, so I was focused more on that customer support role or roles that they had, because I thought, okay, I've got transferable skills there. And I worked a few retail jobs and things like that. So obviously there's the customer service aspect. Even working, in the film and TV production, you're working with other people, and it's very service oriented and whatnot. But when I had gone for the interviews at Earthlink, they were pushing me more towards tech support. And at the time, I didn't really know, what that really meant. Actually, once I got hired, tech support was actually pretty easy because they already had the answers already, sort of worked out. So they had, here's the issues that people have, and here's the resolve. And it was really, again, customer service over the phone with the customer, trying to get them, up and running, or, whatever the problem was. So it actually wasn't that difficult.
Makes sense. So now you make that kind of that shift, or that transition, from doing some or working in TV to more on the customer facing side of tech support. You work with Earthlink, and then, I think when we talked a bit before, within about a week of working there, you kind of got assigned over to the special project, which probably isn't that special by today's standards, but would have been more there, which is how to deal with spam and how to actually, dealing with some of those issues. So how did that kind of kick off? Because I think that sounds like, if I were to read between the lines, that kind of got you in a lot of where you went after the rest of your career, which is more in cybersecurity and doing some of those things. So was it just happenstance, or did you raise your hand, or kind of how did that work out?
I think it was more, well, I think it was a combination of, raising my hand and, wanting to do more. I was a go-getter. So, I was willing to do whatever it took. And so, they were being, as an internet service provider, they were being inundated with spam, or the customers were being inundated. Back then it was, it was all the porn spam. And there were a couple big players that, that were, sort of behind that activity. And they didn't have, so Earthlink did not have a security department. They had an IT department, but no one really running security. And so the spam issue came up, they said, hey, Harris, he's always raising his hand. Let's give him a project to do. So they were like, hey, go learn about spam and how do we deal with it? And that's essentially how it started. The resolve was, coming up with both, what I would call administrative or policy, type introductions. So that was actually when the acceptable use policy was introduced to the world of ISPs. I was actually the author of the acceptable use policy, among a couple of other security experts, in the field. And then, so it was, generating our own policies against, spam and unsolicited email and things of that nature. And then it was coming up with some of the technical controls as well, and working with the IT department, to do that. And then from there, I mean, literally, it was probably another week or so that went by, and one of the heads of IT came to me and said, hey, we don't have a security department. You're doing pretty good at this. You're now the director of security. I was like, oh, great.
Congratulations.
Wonderful. Yeah, congratulations.
Nobody knows what's going on, so you get to figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. It's got to hire a bunch of people, and yeah, so it was fun times.
So now you said, and that, that's is kind of fun. I think that, it does reflect or, represent a lot of times if you're the one that people are willing to take on new projects, raise your hand, even if you don't know exactly what to do or be willing to dive in and figure it out. It presents a lot of opportunities and can direct your path a lot of times to be beneficial. And I think that having that attitude is oftentimes, a differentiation between those that are succeeding in a career and those that are kind of stuck doing the same thing. And so now you did that. And I think from Earthlink, you went and worked for a couple different startups that kind of doing a lot of the same, building out security programs. Is that right?
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah. So, I mean, there was UUNet, which is no longer around. That was part of MCI. It was, around sort of the same thing. Back then it was all about the reputation of the internet service provider in the internet community. I don't know if you remember news groups and things like that, but there were certain news groups that were dedicated to, sort of these, internet, I don't know what you would call them, people that were out there concerned about, the safe and, the safety and well-being of, of the internet, right? And they'd be, hey, this company's doing great, but this company's not doing great. And, you could have lots of complaints against you, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I went to UUNet because their reputation was not very good at the time. And they needed someone to come in and basically build out their investigations group, around trust and safety, essentially, or back then it was called fraud and abuse, and security, really customer facing. And then I went to work for Roadrunner, which was part of Time Warner at the time. And then I went to Excited Home. That got me to the Bay Area. I think, yeah, I mean, they all went bankrupt.
Had a fun run with, several startups. And I think that, that's kind of bittersweet. It can be fun, exciting. You get new opportunities, you get to work on different projects. And yet the startup, world is also one where it can be high stress and certainly a high degree of uncertainty and you having to figure things out. And I think at one point you mentioned, you got a bit worn out or tired around the 2000s, probably alongside the bubble was about to burst for a lot of startups in that realm. But then you went over to work with Wells Fargo and did that for a period of time. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So, I mean, I was kind of burnt out from, from all of the startups and, a lot of them went bankrupt or, were bought out by other companies and things of that nature. And, I wanted to try and stay in the same, the same realm, so to speak. Ended up going to Wells Fargo, and actually worked as a criminal investigator. So completely different. But still, some of the cases that I worked on were of a high tech or cyber relation. So I still got to do some of that, got more into forensics and things of that nature, but also a lot of, sort of outside of, the realm as well, just in traditional financial crimes and things like that. So yeah, did that for a while. And then I think that's when I made the move more into like threat intelligence. That was an area that I liked. Did a little bit of that during the startup phases and things, but I had gone to work for a couple companies, more in a consulting realm, but building out threat intelligence programs for customers and things.
No, that sounds like, it sounds like a continued journey on your path. Now, one of the things that, without rehearsing, just because there was a pretty good amount of businesses, and I want to maybe summarize a bit just so we can talk a little bit about how you got to where you're at today. But you got into Wells Fargo, you worked with Disney, you worked with Safeway and Albertsons, you worked with Levi Strauss, you worked with, I think, another company, NTT. And Ion Insurance and so some of those. And so, was that mostly just for example, short-term projects and they only wanted you for so long, or you got to the point where you liked the variety and the differences, and so you jumped around a bit, or kind of what led you to kind of or go between the, because there are a lot of big companies and a lot of, certainly recognizable names. So what kind of took your path between all of those different companies as you led to where you got today?
Yeah. So, when I went to work for Disney, Disney was a client of the company that I was with prior. And I had, done a really good job for them on a particular project. And then they happened to reach out and say, hey, things are moving pretty fast. We're trying, the information security group or the cybersecurity group, they're trying to, build and mature and, that type of thing. And they happened to have an opening. So I got an interview and, kind of went through the process and then, got hired. This was right, sort of right after the start of retail breaches. So all of those data breaches and stuff from retail, starting with Target and then, everybody else that followed. I mean, the, hundreds of companies that followed after that. So again, we're kind of in this, I don't know what you want to call it, wormhole. So I'm working at Disney and doing great things there. And, so again, it's like companies are like after, the best people. So, it was like Safeway Albertsons, calls and they're like, hey, we'd love to, offer you this job. So, went for that. And then, same thing with Levi's, the CISO that was at Safeway ended up moving over to Levi's. And sure enough was like, hey, I'm impressed with your work. I'd like you to come over there and be my deputy. Okay. So, there we go. After sort of those three companies, each one very similar, I would say, towards the end of those, not engagements, towards the end of those employments, where, in the beginning, you've got lots of budget, you can do everything you need to do, you can hire resources, et cetera, et cetera. Then it would get to the point because, well, all of them had retail, or they were either focused on retail or they had retail components to them, like Disney. And so you'd find, oh, retail is not doing very well in the US. It's doing great over, overseas and stuff like that. But now we have to cut your budget. And then your budget gets cut. And then you can't hire resources, but you have to work longer and more hours. And it was sort of the same thing with all three of those companies. So when I got sort of at the end of Levi's, I said, I want to go back into consulting because then I don't have to deal with budget cuts and resource cuts and things of that nature because, we have customers that are hiring us to do consulting work. And that's why I made the change over to NTT first, where I went in and I built out a virtual CISO program and then delivered. I had a variety of different clients around the globe and, provided CISO services because they didn't have a CISO. And then Aon popped up, saw that as a good opportunity, kind of elevated my career and went over there and, essentially did the same thing. So.
Perfect. No, it definitely makes sense and sounds like a lot of good opportunities. And I think there is some truth that you hit on is that if you're good at your job and you get a good reputation within a given industry, you'll have those opportunities come along because people are always looking for talented and the best, especially for those type of industries. So now with that all in mind, catches up to a little bit where you're at today. Because I think that, a few months ago where you decided to do your own thing, you're going a bit of a different direction. So kind of what prompted that and where are you at today?
Yeah. So, when I was at Aon and I was looking for other opportunities, I was thinking about, and I was interviewing with companies that, I would call them, I would call it the dark side, the vendor side. So, platform as a service or, software as a service type offerings. And I was interviewing at, some cyber threat intelligence, companies and obviously at Elevate Security. And, I was looking to do something different. I've either worked directly for a company or I've worked in the consulting realm, but I've never worked for a product, for a security product or a cybersecurity product. And so I thought, let's look at that avenue. Elevate, what I liked about Elevate is that they're actually working on a particular issue that no one else is working on. So they're kind of like, first in the market to be addressing the particular issue that that their solution covers. And, so ended up coming to Elevate as their CISO or field CISO, all customer facing, basically, being that evangelist, doing a lot of thought leadership, doing podcasts like this, et cetera. And, also working with internal teams as well. So, like working with the product teams to guide them on, these are the features that would make the most sense, from an industry perspective or from, handling this particular issue.
So now with all that, kind of clue people in, where does that leave you at today? Or maybe I missed it, but what kind of, if you're to say now, cluing the audience in, kind of what where are you at today, or kind of what are you doing today?
So I'm with Elevate Security. I've been here, I think this is my 5th month now. So,
congratulations.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So now, with Elevate doing this, kind of now, if you're to look at, you've had a pretty fun and, sort of journey and sort of in a good way, but, going through a lot of different opportunities and chasing down a lot of different things, where do you see the next 6 to 12 months headed for you? Kind of what's in the roadmap?
Definitely, right now we're going through our Series B funding. So that's, it's hot times for us right now at Elevate. We're trying to grow, the number of customers and things of that nature. So I'm, helping out, as much as possible while still, writing articles and, hopefully I will be speaking at RSA in June, and, submitted a speaking slot over at Black Hat, which will actually be my first time speaking at Black Hat. So yeah, just trying to, push the business and, work with our customers and things like that. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, sounds like a lot of a good journey ahead of you, and some fun opportunities. So with that, as we start to wrap up the podcast and reach to the present day of your journey, and even looking into a bit into the future, I always have 2 questions I always want or like to ask. So we'll jump to those now. So the first question is, along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made? And what'd you learn from it?
So I still kick myself today. When I was back at Earthlink, there was a vendor that was an up and comer. It was a startup. It was called Brightmail, and I knew the founder of Brightmail. We had lots of we participated in various industry groups and meetings and things like that, and he had offered me a job, as one of the early, it was like a vice president job at the startup. I think I was living back east in like Northern Virginia or DC, and Brightmail was based in San Francisco. And, I'm like, yeah, it sounds like a great opportunity. Was I ready to go to San Francisco? I don't know. I think it was too early. This was still the mid 90s. I just wasn't sure whether or not Brightmail would do well. Again, it was all based on spam, right? And spam's one issue. Anyway, I turned down that opportunity. Of course, on the other side, they ended up doing very well. They were bought out by Symantec, and he made gajillions of dollars. So I basically lost out on that. I guess, I've always listened to my, what's that saying? I can't even remember the saying. Anyway, listen to yourself, right? I think there's a saying or something, but anyway.
I'm sure there's plenty of them. There's lots of good quotes about listening to yourself or your gut or
Yeah,
whatever
your
that
gut.
might be.
Yeah, your gut feeling. I mean, I always seem to, listen to my gut. I think I've always made the right decisions and things. But yes, I kick myself on that one.
No, and it's one of those that's hard because, as much as you see some opportunities and they turn out to be great and you could have made lots of money or had a lot more opportunity just as easily, sometimes it's one of those that startups go under, small businesses go under, and they don't go well. And you could have made that just an equal decision. So it's always one of those hard ones to where you listen to your gut, do you listen to your head, do you make the right decision, do you take the opportunity, or is it not the right one? And you never quite know, and it's always easy to look back, but sometimes it is just, hey, if it's one that your intuition or your gut's telling you that that's where you should go, sometimes it's best to listen. So that's a great great one to hear or to learn from. Second question, if you're talking to someone that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what'd be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Things are going to take time. So, as long as you stick with the business, there's going to be, ups and downs of the business, especially as a startup. I mean, we go through that now. You've got certain revenue numbers you have to hit and, lots of work that has to be done. And of course you've got, if you're a solution based, company, you've got, let's say you've got 20 customers, every customer wants something different. So you have to prioritize, but you just have to kind of stick with it,
Simple as easy as that. Sticking with it can oftentimes be the difference between success and quitting too early. So I think that's a great piece of advice. Well, if people want to reach out to you, if they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an employee, they want to be an investor, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, or find out more?
Well, I mean, through LinkedIn for sure. My email, can I give my email address?
Absolutely. However you want people to reach out.
Yeah, it's a very simple email address. It's Harris, my first name, Harris at elevatesecurity.com.
All right. We'll definitely encourage people to reach out via email, LinkedIn, or any other way, and then utilize some great services, and if nothing else, make a new best friend. So with that, thank you again for coming on the podcast. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners, if you have your own journey to tell and you'd like to be guests on the podcast, we'd love to have you. Just go to inventiveguest.com, apply to be on the show. Couple more things as listeners, make sure to click subscribe, share, leave us a review, because we want to make sure that everyone finds out about all these awesome journeys. And last but not least, if you ever need help with your patents or trademarks or anything else with your startup or small business, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Thank you again for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thank you. Thank you very much.